"The coffin's for Daniel Hensley," the delivery man said, and the hammer slipped from Walter's hand before it hit the floor. The sound cracked through the workshop like a gunshot, scattering dust from rafters that hadn't moved in years. For a second, the old carpenter couldn't breathe. "Say that again," he whispered. The young man blinked, nervous. "Daniel Hensley. Pick-up order from the county." Walter's throat tightened. "That's my son's name." The man shrugged. "Then it must be a coincidence, sir." But it wasn't. Walter knew every curve of those letters before he even saw them. Burned deep into the lid in the same font he'd once carved for his boy's grave 22 years ago. Daniel Hensley, 2025. The hammer rolled his boot, but he didn't bend to pick it up. He just stared at the box. Long, perfect, freshly polished cedar. His breath rasped. Cedar. He hadn't used cedar since Daniel's accident. His tools suddenly felt foreign, as if they belonged to a stranger who'd spent 2 decades pretending not to remember. The delivery man cleared his throat. "Where do you want it?" Walter's voice came out flat. "Leave it there." When the door shut, silence pressed against him like a weight. He moved toward the coffin, each step slower than the last. The faint smell with oil filled the air, not his mix, someone else's. His fingers brushed the surface and came away trembling. Beneath the nameplate was another mark, small but burned deep, E. Marsh, county coroner. Walter froze. Marsh had signed his son's death certificate all those years ago, the one that said body unrecoverable. He sank to his knees, heart drumming against the silence, and whispered, "Why would Marsh order another coffin now?" No answer, only the creak of old floorboards and the whisper of sawdust falling through light. On the workbench, his calendar hung open to last week. Someone had circled a date in red pencil. Friday. He hadn't done that. And under it, a note in handwriting he hadn't seen in 2 decades. "Don't believe what they buried." Walter's pulse stuttered. He reached for his glasses, staring harder, but the words didn't fade. They stared back. The memory of that night came rushing. Police lights, a soaked jacket on a pier, the sheriff's hand on his shoulder. "Boat capsized," they said. "We found what we could." He'd built Daniel's coffin from oak, sealed it himself, and never asked to open it. Never asked why the coffin weighed less than it should have. He'd buried silence, not truth. Until now. He rose shakily and ripped open the attached envelope. Inside was an order sheet. Client, County Record Office. Purpose, storage. Authorizing signature, E. Marsh. Only the signature didn't match. He remembered Marsh's neat left-handed slant. This was right-handed, hurried, uneven. He flipped the page. On the back was a photo. Daniel standing beside 2 men in suits, one of them Marsh himself. Behind them, a burned cabin and a truck with county plates. Daniel was older in the photo, mid-30s, alive long after the accident. Scrawled across the back in red pencil. They lied. Walter's hand shook so badly he dropped it. He fell against the table, staring at his tools, saw, plane, chisel, all lying like soldiers waiting for command. The walls that once smelled of peace now reeked of betrayal. He tore open the coffin. Inside lay a folded tarp, an old badge, and a coroner's report with its center cut out. The badge read TM, not DH wrong man, he whispered, gripping it so tight the edges cut his palm. He stumbled to the shelf where Daniel's keepsake sat, the watch, the lighter, the photo from his 30th birthday. He compared the watch from the coffin to his son's in the photo. Different engraving. TM again. Whoever they buried wasn't Daniel. The old clock above his bench struck 6. The ticking suddenly sounded like a heartbeat, louder, faster, accusing. Walter sat back down, staring at the coffin. For years, he'd built boxes for others to find peace. But this one wasn't for the dead. It was a message for the living. He grabbed his chisel and pressed it into the wood, carving deep until his hand steadied. The first word he carved wasn't Daniel's. It was justice. He kept carving until the air filled with the sound of its splitting and breath shaking. When the last stroke stopped, he whispered to the empty shop, "If my son isn't in that grave, someone else will be." The light flickered once, dimmed, and the wind outside howled through the cracks like an answer. Walter turned toward the door, heart steady now. For 20 years, he'd built coffins for strangers. Tonight, he'd just finished his first one for the living. Why did you lie to me, Marsh? Walter's voice cracked the stillness of the coroner's office like a hammer hitting steel. Dr. Ernest Marsh froze mid-signature, his pen bleeding a crooked line across a death certificate. The two men locked eyes, one trembling with guilt, the other trembling with age and fury. "Walter, you shouldn't be here," Marsh stammered, glancing toward the door. "Your son's case was—" "Closed," Walter interrupted, stepping forward. "That's what you said 20 years ago. But the coffin you ordered last week says otherwise." Marsh's throat bobbed. "That was a clerical error. A coffin with my son's name?" Walter's voice rose, raw and cracked. "A photograph showing him alive years after you buried him? That's not a clerical error, Marsh. That's murder covered in paperwork." The coroner tried to stand, but Walter slammed a small cedar plank onto his desk. "You see this grain?" he hissed. "It's from the same wood your office ordered. It remembers every nail, every scar. Wood doesn't lie, even if men do." Marsh's face turned pale. "You've been drinking again, Walter. Grief makes people see." Grief ended when the lies started. Walter cut in. He leaned close, the smell of sawdust and old tobacco clinging to him. "Who signed that order, Marsh?" Marsh opened his mouth, then shut again, eyes darting to the file cabinet behind him. That was enough. Walter's hand moved before thought. He yanked the drawer open. Dozens of old files spilled out, their corners stained with age and dust. He snatched one labeled Daniel Hensley, case 4217. Inside, the autopsy report had been replaced by a single note. "Transferred by county order. Confidential. Transferred." Walter whispered. "To where?" Marsh swallowed hard. "I can't tell you that." Walter's jaw tightened. "You will." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object, a corroded badge marked TM. He dropped it onto the desk, the clang echoing through the sterile room. "You buried someone else in my son's grave, didn't you?" Marsh pressed a hand to his forehead. "Walter, I had no choice. It wasn't supposed to be like that. The sheriff—" Walter slammed his palm down. "Sheriff Dunn." Marsh's silence was answer enough. Walter's chest heaved. "He told me Daniel drowned. He showed me ashes. You both signed it." Marsh's hands trembled as he reached for his glass of water. "They said it was an investigation. Your boy, he got involved with something he shouldn't have. The sheriff said letting him disappear was safer. I didn't want to sign it, but they made you a liar," Walter finished coldly. "And me a fool." He turned toward the window, watching the rain smear the view into gray streaks. "Where is he now, Marsh?" The coroner hesitated, then whispered, "I don't know." "They moved him upstate. Some kind of facility. The records were sealed by Dunn's office." Walter turned back, eyes sharp as a blade. "Then I'll unseal them myself." Marsh stood, desperate. "Walter, stop this. You don't understand how deep this goes. People disappeared over that file. Let the dead stay buried." Walter's expression softened just for a moment. "You said that 20 years ago. But my son wasn't one of them, was he?" Marsh's lips quivered. "I'm sorry." Walter nodded slowly, the calm before a storm. "So am I." He picked up the file, slipped it under his coat, and walked out, leaving the badge behind. Outside, the rain had turned to a steady drizzle. His old truck coughed awake as he drove back toward town, headlights cutting through the mist. The file sat open on the passenger seat. The words transferred. County Project 117 underlined twice in red. Beneath it, a signature, Sheriff Dunn. Walter's grip on the wheel tightened until his knuckles turned white. He remembered Dunn's voice at the funeral, soft and rehearsed. "You raised a good boy, Walt. The sea just took him early." The sea hadn't taken Daniel. The law had. Back at the workshop, Walter spread the documents across his workbench, tracing the faded ink with his rough fingers. Paper didn't lie either. It just aged quietly, waiting to be read again. He found something strange at the bottom of the folder, a small, folded receipt from 20 years ago. The date matched Daniel's death. The buyer, Sheriff Dunn. The purchase, 1-seater coffin, custom dimensions. But the handwriting wasn't Dunn's. Walter leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. He knew that hand, it was Daniel's. The way the H curled, the slant of the L. His son had written that order himself. "You built your own coffin," Walter whispered, voice trembling. "Why?" He stared at the line again, custom dimensions. That meant smaller, lighter. A coffin meant to fool a father, not bury a son. The room began to spin. He sat down, head pounding with too many years of silence crashing into the present. Somewhere behind a ticking clock, a truth was whispering, a truth older than lies. Walter's phone rang, sharp and sudden. He flinched. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Static filled the line, then a voice, raspy, strained but familiar. "Dad." Walter's body went still. "Daniel." The line crackled. "Don't trust." Static swallowed the rest. Walter shouted into the phone. "Daniel, where are you?" No response. Just a faint echo of machinery and a door slamming before the call died. He stared at the screen, his reflection trembling in the black glass. The clock behind him ticked once, twice, then stopped completely. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was waiting. Walter placed the phone beside the open file and whispered, "Time's not finished yet." Then he turned off the light. The only sound in the room, the faint creak of the coffin lid shifting, as if something inside had just remembered how to breathe. "Say it again," Walter hissed, pressing the recorder closer to Sheriff Dunn's mouth, his voice trembling between rage and grief. The sheriff's face, half lit by the single hanging bulb in Walter's workshop, glistened with sweat. "You don't understand, Walt." "Say it again," Walter repeated, his hand steady despite the tremor in his arm. Dunn's breath came shallow. "Your son, he wasn't supposed to die." The words echoed through the room, bouncing off the walls lined with coffins and tools. Walter's eyes darkened. Then what was he supposed to do? Disappear? Take the blame for whatever you and Marsh buried? Dunn swallowed hard, glancing toward the door, but the sound of a lock clicking froze him. Walter had sealed it hours ago. No one was coming in or out until he was done. The sheriff's badge caught the dim light, glinting like guilt itself. He found out about the project. Dunn said finally, the county's land deal. Marsh falsified records. Daniel found proof. He was going to expose it. They told me to scare him, not kill him. The fire wasn't supposed to... The fire? Walter's voice cracked like breaking glass. You told me it was the ocean. You showed me a burnt jacket and said my boy drowned. You let me bury ashes that weren't his. He slammed his fist onto the workbench, the sound sharp and final. You took 20 years of father's grief and turned it into a lie. Dunn flinched at the rage that filled the room. It wasn't just me, he stammered. Marsh handled the paperwork. The mayor ordered the cover-up. They said Daniel was part of it, that he took money from files. And you believe that? Walter's voice dropped to a whisper. You knew my son. Dunn looked away. I knew he was stubborn. He wouldn't stop digging. Walter stepped closer, the floorboards creaking under his boots. Neither will I. He turned toward the wall of tools, saws, clamps, chisels, every one of them sharpened to precision. The workshop smelled of varnish and vengeance. Dunn's eyes darted toward the open coffin in the center of the room. What's that for? He asked quietly. Walter looked over his shoulder. For the truth, he said, and whoever's left after it. The sheriff's mouth went dry. You're not gonna kill you? Walter interrupted. No, Dunn. I'm going to make you remember. He picked up a small recorder, pressed play, and Daniel's voice filled the air, the old voicemail Walter had replayed for years. Hey, Dad, I found something big. Something's wrong here. If I don't come home tonight, it's because someone doesn't want me to. The message ended in static, and the silence that followed felt alive. Dunn's knees buckled. Jesus, Walt. Don't use his name here, Walter snapped. Not in this place. He grabbed an old camera from the shelf. Its lens cracked but working. We're going to film this. You're going to tell the truth about what happened to my son. Every name, every lie. Dunn shook his head. You'll destroy everything. The county. You already destroyed everything. Walter cut in. I'm just giving it a headstone. He set the camera on the tripod and pointed it directly at the sheriff. Start talking. Dunn hesitated, then began to speak, haltingly at first, then with the weight of years pressing down. He named the officials who funded the fake development deal, the coroner who falsified records, the warehouse fire stage to erase evidence. Daniel caught them moving stolen equipment. Dunn said, voice shaking. He took photos. Marsh told me to pick him up, scare him quiet. But someone else was there that night, a man in a gray coat. I never saw his face. He lit the match before I could stop him. Walter stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the flickering image of Dunn confessing under the hanging light. And where is Marsh now? Dunn hesitated. They said he retired. But that's not true. He's at the old mill by the bay. County keeps him under some protection deal. Walter exhaled slowly, like a clock ticking toward its last second. Then that's where this ends. He turned off the camera and pocketed the recorder. You'll stay here until morning. Walter, please. Dunn begged, voice cracking. You can't just... Walter gestured toward the coffin. You're safe enough. It's built strong. He opened the lid, revealing nothing inside but a folded letter. Dunn's eyes widened. What's that? Something my son wrote. Walter said quietly, I found it inside the coffin you ordered 20 years ago. He unfolded it, his voice breaking as he read aloud. If you're reading this, Dad, it means they got to me. Don't let them bury what I found. The truth will rot in their hands if you don't take it back. The words hung in the air, raw and final. Walter looked up at Dunn, whose face had turned as pale as the wood around them. You buried the wrong man, Walter said softly. But tonight, I'm done burying. Dunn sank to the floor, hands trembling. What are you going to do? Walter turned off the light, the room falling into darkness, except for the faint glow from the recorder's red light. I'm going to make them remember my son's name. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, shaking the old windows. Walter walked toward the door, the rain beginning to hammer the roof like a warning. He paused and looked back one last time at the coffin, the sheriff's shadow trembling beside it. Time's finally watching, he whispered, locking the door behind him. The storm outside swallowed the sound of Dunn's sobs, and for the first time in 20 years, Walter felt his silence turning into purpose, cold, precise, and unstoppable. Close the door, Marsh, Walter said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of years that could crush a man. The coroner hesitated in the doorway of the workshop, his trembling hands clutching a soaked hat, eyes darting between Walter and the open coffin at the center of the room. Please, Walt, he whispered. We can talk somewhere else. We are talking, Walter replied, sliding a match across the workbench. The flame hissed alive, lighting the old bulb above them, its filament flickering like a heartbeat. Dunn sat slumped in the corner, wrists bound, face bruised, his badge lying useless on the floor beside him. Marsh's lips parted, voice trembling. What did you do to him? Nothing yet, Walter said. He's been telling stories. I brought you here to finish them. Marsh took a step back, but the door clicked shut behind him. There's no need for this, he stammered. The past is done. Walter's eyes met his. The past is what you built, Marsh. I just rebuilt it to fit the truth. He gestured toward the coffin. You recognize the wood? Marsh's face blanched. Cedar. Your favor for lies, Walter murmured. You ordered one just like it 20 years ago, only smaller. For man you said was my son. Marsh's breath hitched. I had no choice. Dunn said a lot of things. Walter cut in. He said my son drowned. He said the ashes in that box were his. He said I should move on. He stepped closer, the floorboards groaning under his weight. But my son's alive, Marsh. I heard his voice. Marsh's knees wobbled. That's impossible. So it was burying the wrong man, Walter said quietly, until you made it happen. He reached under the table and pulled out the old tape recorder. He pressed play. Dunn's voice filled the air, desperate, cracked. He found out about the project. The land, the money. Marsh burned the records. I buried the lie. Marsh's breath caught. He's lying. You both are, Walter said, moving toward him. But only one of you gets to speak before the world hears this. Marsh turned to run, but Walter's arm shot out, slamming the door shut. You don't get to leave again. The coroner's eyes glistened with tears. You don't understand, Walter. Daniel wasn't innocent. He took the evidence. He wanted leverage. He wanted justice. Walter snapped. The kind you were too weak to give him. He pointed to the coffin. You built his grave. Now you'll sit where he should have stood. Marsh looked at the coffin, horror dawning in his eyes. You're insane. No, Walter said, his voice low, steady. I'm a carpenter. I just fix what's broken. He motioned to Dunn, who groaned from the corner. Tell him, Sheriff. Tell him what happens when the truth starts breathing again. Dunn lifted his head weakly, eyes glassy. He knows, he whispered. He's been waiting for you to find out. That's why he ordered the new coffin. Walter turned sharply to Marsh. Is that true? Marsh's silence was louder than a confession. The rain outside grew heavier, rattling the windows. Walter stepped closer, the match still burning between his fingers until it touched his skin. He didn't flinch. You thought the world forgot him, he said, voice trembling with restrained fury. But I built a life around the memory of a boy who never came home. Every nail, every coffin, every scar on my hands. They all belong to him. And now, so will yours. Marsh dropped to his knees. Please, Walter. I was following orders. The mayor, the investors, they made me falsify everything. I didn't kill him. Walter's jaw tightened. But you buried him anyway. He moved to the workbench and grabbed the old video camera, its red light blinking faintly. He aimed it at Marsh. Say his name. Marsh shook his head. Say it. Walter roared, and the coroner's voice broke. Daniel Hensley. I signed his death to save myself. His sobs filled the workshop. Walter lowered the camera, breathing hard. That's the first honest sound you made in 20 years. He reached for the recorder, playing Daniel's old voicemail once more, the voice of a son who had warned his father danger. Too late. The sound brought Marsh to tears, but Walter just stood still, staring at the coffin. I built this one for peace, he said quietly. But peace doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from truth. He nodded toward the coffin. You'll stay in there until the storm stops. Marsh's eyes widened. Walt, please. But Walter had already lifted the lid. It's lined with the same cedar you used for Daniel's, he said. It'll remember you, too. Marsh stumbled forward, babbling apologies as he climbed inside, his body shaking. Walter shut the lid gently, the sound sealing the air like the closing of a chapter. He sat beside it, the rain muffling the faint pounding from within. Dunn spoke weakly from the corner. You're no better than us. Walter looked at him, eyes hollow but calm. The difference is I built what I bury. The workshop was quiet except for the hammering storm and the ticking of the old clock that had started again on its own. Walter stood, picked up the recorder, and walked to the window. The rain streaked down like silver veins across the glass. You know, he said softly, my son once told me every piece of wood has a memory. Maybe that's why coffins creak when liars lie inside them. He turned off the light. The bulb flickered once, then went out completely, leaving only the sound of rain and faint thuds fading beneath the cedar lid. Walter stood there for a long moment, the shadows swallowing him whole. Then he whispered the same line his son wrote in the letter. The truth will rot in their hands if I don't take it back. He reached for his coat, his tools, and the camera, and stepped into the storm. Behind him, lightning flashed through cracks in the workshop, illuminating the coffin one last time. Still silent and waiting, the door swung shut on its own, the lock clicking softly, like a clock marking the end of a life and the beginning of justice. Make sure to like this channel, subscribe, and enjoy the videos.